Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm going to have the opportunity to talk to you about mind games, how we can use data to solve for the human element. Before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I got here and got to be so excited to be on having this topic of conversation with you. So I've spent close to 2 decades in the security space, looking at security from a variety of different angles. Started my career working on the defense sector. I am originally from Russia, so I had a chance to work on Russian APT threats. From there, joined Salesforce in 2012, where I got to build and run the security engagement team focused on all aspects of human risk, from employee good and bad behavior to secure coding and then security feature adoptions by customers. My love of this question of how do we look at the human element of risk took me to starting my own company, Elevate Security, which today builds and runs the world's leading human risk management platform that uses data and behavioral science to change employees' behavior. But throughout my entire career, I've been really focused on the question of how do we get people to want to do security instead of have to? How do we evolve this conversation from just a checkbox and compliance-driven oriented problem to one in which our employees are part of the defense network? So one of the things that I've noticed trying to solve this problem time and time again from different organizations and both as a practitioner and now owning a company is that I have come to believe that human risk is one of the largest unsolved problems in security. And the reason I say this is because if you open up the Verizon data breach report at any point in the last 10 years, you're going to find that elements related to human factor, human error, malicious or unintentional, lead to some of the top reasons why breaches are successful year after year. This year is no exception. In 2020, these are the statistics of common buckets of attack vectors that we have seen be successful in breaches, and so many of them have human error associated with them. And it's not an exception this year. If you take a look at the ones that are trending at the very top, you see that it's social, phishing, hacking and use of stolen credentials, and things like technical issues, malware in this particular case, has gone down, whereas the top ranking 1, 2, and 3 all have human factors associated with it. And the reason I think it is this prominent, and the question that we started this conversation with from Piotr is, it's this big of a problem is because human risk is the largest unexplored problem in security. We just assume easily, we say, hey, human beings are the weakest link, let's design around them. But we haven't really dug in and say, well, why and what's effective and how can we unpack it? And today, if any of you have ever worked for an organization that is large or compliance driven, you inevitably have gone through some type of mandatory security training that makes you feel exactly like this. We mute it, we skip to the end, and we guess this quiz question, and that's our best in class approach to the space. And it's incredibly hard to measure in a one size fits all. And we haven't really gotten off of this hamster wheel of solution or best practice, trying to address one of our largest problems. So what I'm going to do in the rest of this talk is walk through how we can use the data we have in our organizations to understand where to look for human risks, understand what approaches that we're currently using to be effective or not, and what kind of remediation techniques might actually be effective. So the first thing that I wanted to start this conversation with is a review of a study that I came across from a couple of years ago, done in 2014 by Dr. Caputo. And she ran one of the most extensive research questions I have seen on this particular topic. And so what the study did was it sent 3 targeted spear phishing emails to over 1,500 employees over a course of several months. And the hypothesis of this particular test was that if you made a mistake and clicked on the phishing link, you would pop up, you would have a training pop up that would tell you what you did wrong. And the idea here is that this type of experiment would lower the rate of clicking spear phishing emails and increase reporting. Seems logical. It's a best practice that many of our organizations do. But this was the first test that actually wanted to see if it was effective and if we're putting forth effective remediations. And what they found, this was the email that they sent out, right? So if you clicked on a link and you got training, you got to the right hand side training, and on the left was just the control group, just to see if the training was effective. And so what they ended up finding was quite surprising. First, they found either all or none of the employees, mostly they grouped themselves into cohorts. And as an employee, you either clicked on almost all the emails or none of the emails. So you're very likely to have similar patternings across all three. Next, the way you performed on your first email was very good indication of how you're going to perform on all subsequent spear phishing tests after. And they found that the training had no significant effect on whether or not it impacted your likelihood to click on future links. And everybody spent mere seconds on the training, if at all, showing that they did not retain any of the content. So if this was the case and these were the findings, one of the things that I wanted to take a look at this was, can we take this research and explore it further? So if everyone is either clicking on links or not clicking on links in cohorts, and we can predict based on how they perform once, can we see how they're going to perform in the future? Can we use this information to actually predict good and bad security performance across security behaviors? And if training doesn't matter, how do we design more effective interventions to change these actions? So let's start with the first question. So the team at Elevate Security and I posed this particular question to ourselves. And before I get into what we found, I wanted to tell you a little bit about our research methodology to give you some context as to how we came to our conclusions. So at Elevate Security, we integrate with a variety of existing security tools in enterprise networks that can map to security actions of employees. So what we are doing is integrating security events done by employees, both good and bad, across a variety of different behaviors. We then map that information against HR hierarchy so we can create heat maps of what's happening that's good or bad in an organization. And so we are taking a data set which, to the best of my knowledge, is one of the most robust in the world today. It has over 1 million different behavioral actions done by over 80,000 different employees across the globe and observed over 18 months. And the behavioral actions that I'm talking about are listed here on the right-hand side. You can see we were taking a look at 5 different categories for mock and real-world phishing, whether or not someone opened, clicked, compromised, or reported the email. When they took training, was it late or on time? Was it mandatory or voluntary? For password managers, and this is primarily a software-based password managers like a LastPass, for example. Do they have the account set up and do they actively use it? And are they receiving personalized scorecard, which I'll get into a little bit more detail later on. And from an HR perspective, we're looking at a variety of different aspects of the employee. How long have they been with the company, their tenure? Where are they in geography? Where are they from a department? Are they a manager? And what's their employment status? So this is how we slice this data set. And the first thing we want to say was, does your HR data predict where you are going to, how you're going to act on security actions? So the first thing we wanted to see was who's most likely to use a password manager. So we built this decision tree where we slice the pool of data based on the most predictive attributes in the data set. And the way you can read this is by looking at this tree, and everything that falls to the left answers yes to the question, dividing the data, and everything that falls to the right answers no. So the first thing we asked was, are you outside of the US? And so we're splitting the data based on geography. From there, we are locating, are you outside of Europe, or have you been in the company less than 2 years? And then from there, we're splitting it up on a variety of different tenure lengths in the company. And what we're finding is that there's 2 groups that show statistically interesting likelihoods of using a password manager. And so what we could see from our data set is that employees in the Asia Pacific region who have been with the company longer than 1.3 years are least likely to use a password manager. Employees that are in the United States with the company that longer than 1.3 years are most likely to use a password manager. And geography was the strongest indicator of likelihood, whereas tenure had a very slight predictor on the outcome of whether or not you're going to be using it. So that's a password manager. Next, we wanted to see about phishing attacks. Similarly, we built a decision tree and we split the data first on whether or not you're relatively new to the company. Have you been with the company less than 2.5 years? Are you full-time or outside the US? And then a variety of other different attributes. And what we found was, again, 2 cohorts that were likely, least likely and most likely to click. And to summarize the data, we found that short tenured contractors on large teams were most likely to click on phishing links. The least likely were employees in the United States who had been in the company more than 3 years, but less than 16. So again, if you were in a company relatively new, so less than 6 years or more than 16 years, so you've been there for a long time, you were much more likely to click. And tenure, of all of the attributes that we could slice the data, tenure was the most likely, most predictive element. So those were based on HR data. And the next question, and the area where a lot of our future research is leaning into, is can we predict what you're going to do in the future based on how you've acted in the past? And one of the data sets that we had was training, and whether or not you completed training on time or late. And what we found is that employees who completed all of their security training on time had a phishing click-through rate of about 9%, so they were detecting it about 91% and reporting it about 48% of the time. Those employees who regularly completed security training late had clicked on phishing links 11% of the time and reported only 42% of the time, with a delta of 2.2 and 5.8 respectively. And while this statistic alone doesn't have, like, you could say, well, 2% isn't significant. When you multiply it first and foremost by an employee base of hundreds of thousands, that amplifies pretty quickly. But then this is just this one particular factor distilled. Now, if you take a look at other attributes that we just discovered, so if let's say you were a newly tenured employee located outside of the United States who's regularly late on training, all of those compound to help paint a picture of you being a high-risk employee as it relates to security actions. So those were our findings on can we predict good and bad security behavior based on attributes around your who you are as an employee. The next question we wanted to ask is, well, how do we design more effective interventions? If you go back to the very first study that we covered at the beginning with the 1,500 spear phishing emails, one of the findings from that study was that almost nobody stayed on the training more than a couple of seconds. So even if people clicked, we could not get their attention long enough to even give them the knowledge and information we need for them to change their behavior. Now, why is that? We historically, as a security practitioners, believe that only our employees or our workforce knew how to do something differently, they would just totally do it differently. It's a knowledge gap. If only they knew about how dangerous it was to reuse a password, they would absolutely no longer reuse passwords. But what we have come to find year after year is that knowing is not enough. And LastPass did a really great study a couple of years ago where they demonstrated this incredibly well. They found that they surveyed hundreds of their users in their platform, and they found that a significant proportion of their user base knew knew all about secure passwords, knew that why it was important, understood the risk of reusing it, and yet still chose to reuse passwords or have really easy to remember passwords. So the difference between knowledge and action is significant and is one of the things that we need to be taking into account as we design for these types of interventions. If knowing was enough, everyone who smoked would probably quit smoking because it's on all of the packaging and all the labels, and we know that smoking kills us, and yet we still do this, right? So human beings are just complex. So if knowing isn't enough, what's the missing puzzle piece here? If we don't need to just be giving our employees more training with just more information, what do we need to be giving them? And that last puzzle piece is motivation. If I don't care how much I know about this particular object or a particular item. If I don't care to take action, if I don't care to learn or course correct, I'm never going to do it. And there's in behavioral science a fundamental formula that I want to share with you all that dictates this particular phenomenon. And what it says is that for anybody to change a habit or a behavior, 3 things need to exist at the exact same time in the right amounts in order for that action to happen. First, I need to have the motivation to do that action. Second, I need to have the ability to do that action. And third, I need to be reminded. So if I really want to become an excellent long distance runner, I need to really have the motivation to do it. I really either want to get fit or achieve a personal goal. I need to have the ability. I need to have really good running shoes and 2 legs that aren't broken to do this. And the last is I need a reminder. I need either a calendar reminder or a friend to go running with or a time in my day where I regularly do this. Because without the combination of those 3 things at the same time, that's just not going to happen. And when we think about motivation in context for how we are tackling security, and again, back to the very first study that we covered, we need motivation in our employees first to want to not click on the email and to report. And when they do, we need to give them the motivation to want to course correct, want to consume the knowledge and the behavior change and actually apply the things that we are teaching them. So those are 2 discrete buckets of motivation that we need to be considering applying to our employees. So I'm going to give you in the second half of this presentation 3 motivational hacks that I have seen in my career be extremely effective in getting employees to buy into changing security actions. They can be all used in combination or individually. The first is social proof. Social proof is a concept in psychology that really leverages the fact that everyone else is doing it, so I should as well. We think about this in the back of our mind unconsciously. And advertising and marketing have come to leverage this extremely efficiently in getting us in driving our purchases. So one of the top examples is, say, in a purchase on Amazon, for example, and you can see, oh, well, this particular thing has 79% 5-star reviews. It must be good, so I should buy this. The concept of peer reviews and stars leverages, again, social proof. The concept of, if any of you have booked hotels online, they use social proof all the time. You can see on this particular screenshot, it's in high demand. It was booked 41 times in the last 24 hours. There's only 6 rooms left. And so you're driving this mentality of everyone else thinks this is a good deal, I should as well. Also using reviews, number of reviews and score. And then the last is something that the United States rolled out a couple of years ago, and it is a energy bill report that people in neighborhoods get. And what it does is it rates your energy consumption compared to your neighbors, and it also compares to your most efficient neighbors. So you can see how good you are compared to your best performing energy saving neighbors and what you can do differently. So again, all leveraging social proof. Now, this has also been done in security before. A couple of years ago, the Georgia Institute of Technology, in partnership with Facebook, rolled out this particular experiment where they were trying to drive the security feature adoption of MFA for personal accounts. And for a subset of users, what they did was they put up a control text that said, MFA is really good and important for your account, please turn it on. And in comparison, they rolled out to a subset of users something using social proof, and it showed how many people in their network were already using this particular security feature. So in this case, 108 of your friends are doing this. And they found that the social context one was 1.36 times more successful in getting employees to adopt that particular security feature. Similarly, in the Elevate platform, what we do for the security behaviors that we pull into our ecosystem is we compare a specific security action like phishing click-through rates and reporting rates compared to an employee's department, their company, and the best performer in their organization. And places where they're above the threshold, better than their department, they get badges and accolades, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. And then if they are below a threshold, if they are doing worse, they're given the specific actions to follow up around what they need to do. But this is particularly impactful because instead of saying, hey, you suck at phishing, here's training, the language is much more effective of, you are much more likely than the rest of your department, so here's some training. And so it is motivation to take the next action around course correcting for that behavior. Similarly, we use a variant of social proof called celebrity social proof, which highlights someone famous or important in your organization doing something great. So we use, again, advertising and marketing sees this all the time, where famous sports stars are using a specific type of sports sneakers, and you think, oh, well, that must be a good sneaker. Why not for security? You can say, hey, did you know that your CEO is using a password manager? You should too. And so this short circuits a lot of, well, I don't know, is it good for me? I've heard mixed reviews. It models what great looks like by someone who you admire and respect. The trick is actually picking somebody that you admire and respect for this particular type of activity. So that is social proof. The next motivational hack that I wanted to walk through with you all is gamification. Now, just to level set, gamification is not about playing games at work. It's not about turning on a video game in a work environment, playing with your colleagues. What gamification is unpacking what makes gaming successful, those game mechanics, and applying them to get to business results. Because gaming has figured out to the tune of a multi-billion-dollar industry how to get people to be engaged and motivated and want to continue to do this action. So there is a magic formula that gaming uses to get its players bought into the ecosystem. And those can be unpacked and applied to not game environments. Let me show you what that actually looks like. Before I get into those examples, I want to show you what those 5 magic elements are. The first, in order to make any game successful, but then applying this outside of the game environment, the first is autonomy. We have to have choices. You can't, the difference between saying, get me a cup of coffee and will you please get me a cup of coffee, registers so significantly differently in my brain, and how willing I am to get you a cup of coffee will change based on whether or not you've given me a choice. Autonomy. Mastery. In gaming environment and in life, it's not necessarily about getting to the finale. If we enjoy the journey, then we actually enjoy the process of getting better and better. And so this is in gaming why we like to level up time after time, not just win the game. And the way we do that and get to mastery is through feedback. We need to understand where we have gone wrong and how we get better at it. And having tight feedback loops is one of the best, most effective ways of getting us to mastery. Purpose is important if we understand why what we're doing connects to something bigger than us, and if we are in connection with others. So what this looks like from a business perspective, I've put together 4 examples that we see often in our environments. The first is airline miles. Airline miles is one of the most classic examples of gamification. They have figured out how to route us through airports and on certain airlines to get to points and achieve status and to maintain our red carpet versus blue carpet kind of boarding, right? So great example of gamification. Fitbit and any other type of exercising trackers have also done a great job where they're using leaderboards and talking about how you've leveled up. Similarly, you're gamifying fitness. Even your LinkedIn profile is gamified, where you can say, oh, you're almost, my profile strength is intermediate, I'm almost to advanced, I just need to do 2 more things. So again, what's my feedback? How far am I from mastery? What is the impact of what I need to be doing? It says members with the photos get 21 times more profiles. So you're connecting this with why I'm doing it. And the last is loyalty cards to your favorite coffee shop, right? So buy 10, get the 11th free. And so you're gamifying loyalty and purchasing of coffee. So these are all ways we've seen this show up in our environment. Let's take a look at what it looks like in security. So one of the ways that we like to communicate security gamification levels is through these security strength scores. So instead of saying, hey, you suck at security, it's a, hey, you're tenuous or you're flimsy and you need to get to indestructible. So this is the security strength and understanding how far you are from mastery. On the right-hand side, similar type of leaderboards, but we found it effective for leaders in departments to compare their overall security strength compared to their peers. And this is at a department level. So you're aggregating everyone's score, you're grouping it together. And so what you're doing is comparing how all of marketing is doing compared to finance. I have found that this level of competition is unbelievably effective for salespeople and executives. And then the last thing, the one in the middle, is a group accountability, a group scorecard. And this leverages a gamification principle called streaks. So for safety environments, places like oil and gas or manufacturing, safety is their #1 focus. And so what they have done, and many of you are probably familiar with this, is number of days since last accident, right? Why can't we do something like this for security? So can you say number of days since last phishing click-through by an employee? And it's anonymous, but it resets. And so if you click on a link, and so what it does is it gives me personal motivation as an employee before I get a phishing link and say, or as I get a phishing link, before I click on it, to actually make me pause and ask, do I want to be the person that resets this clock? What if I'm wrong? So all of these are giving employees motivation to pause their routine and say, maybe I should change my behavior. How should I be thinking about this differently? So that is gamification and all the different flavors of it. And the last that I wanted to share with you is positive reinforcement. Now, positive reinforcement is actually kind of a foreign concept for us as security practitioners. We have this concept of a carrot versus a stick. So I can either encourage you to do this with recognition and reward, or I can punish you for you to not do this. I want to unpack this in a little bit more detail and show you what it looks like in more behavioral science terms. So negative reinforcement is when we strengthen a behavior so that we avoid a negative outcome. The behavior that is shown in this particular example is putting on sunscreen. I don't put on sunscreen because I particularly enjoy putting on sunscreen, but I really don't like getting sunburned. So I am putting on sunscreen to avoid the negative outcome of getting sunburned. And just to foreshadow a little bit here, almost all of the ways that we engage with our employees is negative reinforcement. And I'll talk about that in a second. Now, positive reinforcement is the opposite of that, is when a good behavior happens, we reinforce that by giving applaud, accolades for that good behavior. We train our pets all the time with this. We train our children on a variety of different behaviors to do this. Why not our employees? This is something that we apply as parents, as pet owners, but not as peers in the workforce. And so when we think about it from a security perspective, almost all the interactions that an employee gets from us is negative reinforcement. So we use training as the punishment. So when I click on a phishing link, I get training. And so the best that I can do is I'm avoiding phishing to not get training. So in this case, training is the sunburn part in our brain, and that's how we're wiring it. And reward is the absence of that training. So why in the world would I ever spend any extra time on that? Like, that doesn't feel like it's a desirable end state. If you think about other types of interactions we have as security teams, reset my password, or reset your password in this time manner, or you will get locked out. Follow this policy, or you are going to get sent to HR. Take this training, or your account will be locked out. So everything I am doing is to avoid a negative outcome. What happens when I do something great? Where is the positive reinforcement? Nothing. Almost all the time it is silence. And I do not get any recognition for detecting flawlessly all the phishing attacks in my inbox, making sure that malware never gets introduced on my machine, patching regularly on time. There's no type of recognition for that, even though that is probably outside of most of my job, day-to-day job activities. And so what you're seeing here is an example of how we can take the same behavior, which is getting people to not click on phishing, and changing the way we address this. So you clicked on a link, now take training, negative reinforcement. Or at the end of a month it said, hey, we phished you twice this month and you detected all of them. Thank you so much. And so it gets recognized at an all hands or from the CEO or CC to a manager, but your behavior gets recognized and applauded. So it's a way of being seen. Just to wrap this particular section up, is what we're seeing in this particular study is that in a study done in 2014, this research paper found that it is possible to change behavior with both negative and positive reinforcement, and punishment can be effective. However, the long-term implications of using negative reinforcement can be in fact quite painful, because it has a downside on the morale of employees. And positive reinforcement not only changes behavior, but also encourages enthusiasm and engagement, getting people to want to do the action. One of the things that we have done, again, over these types of over this length of time that we've observed these behaviors, is that using a combination of gamification, social proof, and positive reinforcement has led to these types of behavioral change outcomes in the employee populations that we are tracking. So we from our perspective at Elevate have seen significant impacts in this particular, in using these types of approaches. And so just to summarize the lot of different topics we covered in the talk today, can we predict whether or not employees are going to be falling into a cohort of good or bad behavior? And the answer to that question is, in fact, we can. We've seen that tenure has a really great correlation to phishing resiliency, and employees who are relatively new to the company or very tenured tend to perform the worst. Geography is, for now, an indication of password manager adoption, and that late training, security training, correlates to how resilient you are on both phishing click-through rates and reporting. And when we take a look at how we remediate and change employees' actions on this, we want to leverage the motivational parts, not just getting people to know what they need to be doing, the ability, but also getting them to want to do it, because we're going to see significant changes here. in outcomes, and using techniques like social proof, gamification, positive reinforcement to achieve that behavior change. We are constantly researching this topic, and as we get more insights and data, we publish this on our website here. So if you're interested in staying on top of our findings and our learnings, please come and visit us at elevatesecurity.com Learning Hub. And with that, over to you guys.